Meantime, a religious freedom group is sounding the alarm about conditions in the country since the U.S. withdrawal and the Taliban takeover. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom released a report this week saying, in part, quote, through a series of edicts, decrees, and circular letters, the Taliban have systematically restricted the religious freedom of all Afghans, including those with differing interpretations of Islam. The report also says that women continue to be banned from education, employment, and freedom of movement. And joining us now is Jason Jones with the Vulnerable People Project. He knows firsthand about the many issues and challenges facing the Afghan people. Jason, so good to be with you. I'm sure this report from USCIRF probably comes as no surprise to you. That said, tell us a little bit more about women and girls and what they're facing in Afghanistan and what your organization is doing to help.
Thank you, Tracy. Well, the report comes as no surprise, and listening to the previous package, it's still knowing the truth. Every time you hear it, it breaks your heart. The religious persecution is really the tip of the iceberg. You have 44% of Afghans living in severe hunger. You have the Hazara Shia minority suffering extreme abuse. The crackdown on women, it comes as no surprise. But when you have 13 Americans died at Abbey Gate, the sacrifice of 2 decades of American men and women in uniform, their service. 170 Afghans died that day when the Abbey Gate bomb went off. Now almost half of the population suffering severe hunger. This is really all of the fruit of the ham-fisted withdrawal of U.S. troops in what was really the greatest military blunder in American history.
Yeah, a lot of heartbreak from all of that, especially from the Abbey Gate bombing, as we heard, as you mentioned in Eric's report. Quickly, what do you think we can do to help these Gold Star families going forward?
Well, we need to call our members of Congress and demand that their questions be answered. The stonewalling and arrogance that we're seeing from the Biden administration to our veterans, to our heroes, to Gold Star families is unbelievable. And the other thing we do, and that's what Vulnerable People Project is doing, is we need to keep our commitment to their cohorts, their Afghan cohorts, their allies. Over 100,000 Afghan SIVs, those are Afghans who served in the most dangerous jobs alongside American forces, who were promised visas in exchange for their service, have been abandoned in Afghanistan. We saw after withdrawal the calls and texts to suicide hotlines for veterans skyrocketed. So I think the 2 things that we can do is demand that these Gold Star families have their questions answered, and that we keep our promise to those Afghans who fought shoulder to shoulder with American men and women for over 2 decades, who now are, facing the worst types of abuse. They've been hiding for two years now, waiting for the Biden administration to move to process their visas.
And Jason, I know that your organization, VPP, does a lot to help families and vulnerable people everywhere. In fact, you were recently in Hawaii helping out in the wake of the devastating wildfires. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, my organization I'm from Hawaii. It was founded in Hawaii 21 years ago to serve vulnerable communities facing genocide, democide, and war. And it was really an unbelievable experience to be flying back home on a plane with members of my team to set up emergency support in the wake of the tragic fires. I was in Ukraine just earlier this summer, and the damage and devastation that I saw in Lahaina was worse than anything that I've ever seen. And I've traveled with the Peshmerga through Iraq as they liberated it from ISIS and saw those towns. I've been in Ukraine and was in towns that had been reclaimed from Russia. But the only thing that I can compare it to is maybe the firebombing of Dresden or Tokyo, complete destruction.
Yeah, and it's really hard to believe for us who are just seeing the images. I know it must be so different being there on the ground and seeing it firsthand. What do you see as the biggest needs right now for the folks there in Hawaii?
And there are 3 things. We need to care for the living and for the survivors who've lost everything. A town that housed 13,000 people has been wiped off the map, with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people still missing. So we need to care for the living. We need to honor the dead, and we need to make sure that they receive proper burials. And that's something that VPP is committed to, paying for all of the funerals for families that need help. And then finally, we need to keep Lahaina local. We need to make sure that those Kama'aina families, those Native Hawaiian families, and the families that built Lahaina over the past 150 years don't lose everything in the wake of this catastrophe. And then something else that the Vulnerable People Project is doing, and I was so excited that you had Mrs. Tanata on, the principal of Sacred Heart School that is still caring for the children of Lahaina, as VPP is working with Epic Ministries, a local Hawaiian Catholic organization, and with the families of Lahaina to make sure all of the students can still continue with their Catholic education.
Yeah, which is a wonderful thing indeed. Jason, what are you hearing from the folks there? What are they telling you?
You know, it's sort of like what you see at war. They're just shocked. The saddest thing that I saw was in just a few days after the fire, as we were driving through Lahaina, there was a middle-aged woman with no shoes on, walking through the devastation, talking to herself and crying. And that's something I've seen so many times in towns and cities that have been wrecked by war. But to be in my home state, the family of my friends, and the home of my family and friends, to see a woman walking through a city that's no longer there, and one can only imagine the heartache that she was feeling, it's unimaginable. And I think that really captures the confusion, the sadness. But there's hope. Like I said, the Catholic school is up and running. Mrs. Tanata has her pop-up school. The students are going to Sacred Heart Church every day for Mass, and the people are working to rebuild. So there is hope. But I think that this tragedy, which in my mind, it's something that we can compare to Katrina or 9/11, but I fear that the American people haven't really grasped the severity of what has happened to the families of Maui.
Yeah, if people want to help, how can they do so?
Well, at hopeforhawaii.com, if you go and donate at hopeforhawaii.com, you will be helping to pay for those funerals, and you will be helping to make sure that every Catholic young person in Maui, in Lahaina, that wants to continue to receive their Catholic education can do that. That's hopeforhawaii.com.
All right, Jason, thank you so much for coming on. God bless you, and thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.